Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Sheviis chapter 10, Halacha 2. In the Art Scroll, it's 83b1. Now we're going to get into the Prozbul, and this is going to be something that was enacted by the rabbis. Why? Because it's to cancel cancellations of loan on Sheviis. Why? Because people stopped lending money to poor people, especially in the sixth year. And, it's very serious to take away loans and money from poor people who might need it. There's a saying in the Gemara that poverty chases after the poverty. Poverty chases after the poor. And so, there's a compounding effect on by being poor, and it can really be crushing. And Judaism is a thing of kindness and chesed, and really it's an act of chesed in order for people to loan money to poor people. And in the case where people will stop to do it because they're worried about loans being canceled by Sheviis, they saw that you have to protect the poor people and find a way that the loans can be preserved so the capital will still be available. The Mishnah says that if a Prozbul was executed, Sheviis does not cancel the loan. Again, in the Torah, you can't waive rights in the Torah. Okay, so you can't waive the right to do Shabbat or to say the Shema. In the Halacha, you didn't say anything when you do that. Over here, this is a monetary thing. So you can waive the right to have the loan get canceled. You're acknowledging it, they're acknowledging it, it's a fair loan, and it's being submitted to the Bet Din, so that Bet Din is also looking at the loan to make sure that it's a fair loan as well. And this is going to be where the Prozbul gets set up so that it's one way where the person can waive their right in the Torah. It's one of the few places where they can. This is only in the monetary law can this stuff happen. Now I want to point out Prozbul. Okay, it's a combined word. Prozbul is coming from pros, boule, bute, and pros is going to be for rich men. Boule is for poor men, and so the idea is that rich are going to benefit in that they're able to safeguard their loans, and the poor are going to be able to benefit in that they're going to be able to get loans. And the suffix bute is not used because the main thrust of the enactment is to protect the creditors. So that's the idea of the word Prozbul. It's a combination of words, and the Mishnah continues, says, this was one of the matters instituted by Hillel the elder, and when he saw that the people refrained from lending money to each other, they were transgressing, says the Mishnah, what is written in the Torah, for it is stated, take heed lest there be an evil thought in your heart, saying, the seventh year draws near. And Hillel instituted the Prozbul. Now, this, by the way, in the Mishnah, it's talking about Devarim 15:9. And this is warning people from giving loans out of a worry that is going to be canceled by Sheviis. And people were worried that the debt would not be repaid before the end of Sheviis, and it would be canceled. And the Mishnah is apparently explaining the motivation for Hillel's institution was to prevent wealthy people from violating this biblical law. So the Prozbul is instituted to protect the assets of rich people and not to prevent a violation of biblical law. And the Gemara is going to explain the authority that Hillel had to institute this institution that looks like it's circumventing Torah law. So the Mishnah now explains how the Prozbul is executed. And the Mishnah says that this is the text of the Prozbul. I am submitting to you so-and-so and so-and-so, the judges who are in such and such place, that every debt due me I shall be allowed to collect whenever I wish, and either the judges sign below the text of the Prozbul or the witnesses sign. So in whichever formula, this is being turned over to a bet din, and it's going to be the bet din that's going to be able to collect. So you are not going to chase to collect for the loan. The bet din is going to do it. That's one of the differences here. You're not allowed in the Torah to go and pursue the loan. If you've lent money, you're not allowed to on Sheviis, but the bet din can. And that's part of why it's being turned over to a bet din. So we're going to get into the Gemara, and it was talking about how the Beurim is going to be deriving this Prozbul. So the Gemara says from here they support the use of Prozbul, which is biblical. That's being deraita. That's very surprising. So the Beurim is basically saying that the execution of Prozbul is biblically valid, like handing over one's note to the court. And the Gemara is going to ask, but is a Prozbul deraita? Is that biblical? So why is our Mishnah stating that it was instituted by Hillel the elder? And the Gemara is going to explain that the Beurim means when Hillel instituted the Prozbul, this is going to be Hillel in his court, they base it on biblical law. And that, again, is also going to be surprising. So why? And the Pnei Moshe is going to explain about this, that since, according to biblical law, loans that were actually handed over to the court do not become canceled, Hillel is going to institute that a lender can declare his loan handed over to the court by means of a Prozbul. So, effectively, the Gemara is explaining that the Beurim does not mean that a Prozbul is effective according to biblical law. What it means is that Hillel extended the biblical law of handing over one's loan notes to the court, which, by the way, is a physical transferring of the documents to the court. And that's going to be where you're transferring, where the person who writes the Prozbul is going to transfer the debt to the court. So according to this conclusion, in order to execute the Prozbul, the lender only is going to be declaring that he's transferring the receivable debts to the court without necessarily handing over the loan documents. So really what happened was the court's allowed to go collect a debt. And so really what you're doing, and that, by the way, is a deraita thing, and what Hillel did was effectively extend it to say, well, since the court's already allowed to go collect a debt, no problem. You're going to sign over your debt to the court, and the court is going to go collect it, and then they'll repay you on it. And so that's how they instituted it, where the poor people could still get access to credit, and the rich people could still preserve their loans without the Sheviis year coming to wipe out the loan. Now, this is a much lower level of Amunah. The level of Amunah descended. And, this is in a time when Hillel and Shammai were both alive. There was a lot of Roman pressure and persecution. And this is going to be a time when the Amunah of the people started to descend a little bit. And, in earlier times, people weren't doing that. People would still be open-handed and make the loan and not worry about it because, again, it's a Kodesh Baruch who has all the silver and gold. God has all the money. So, do what the Torah says and let God sort out the money. And just do the will of God and don't worry about it so much. But the people's faith started to fall apart a little bit. And so now you have a serious case where maybe poor people who, by the way, Israel is under a lot of Roman pressure at the time. And, even so much pressure that they were actually trying to hunt down and kill Shammai. So, the question is going to be, what do you do for poor people who might not have access to money for food even? So you have to protect their interests. You have to always protect the poor. So the Gemara is going to question how Hillel can institute the Prozbul to circumvent biblical law. And Rabbi Huna says, I asked the following question for Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha, according to the one who says that the tithing requirement is biblical even during the Second Temple era. So how could Hillel at the same time institute the Prozbul in conflict with biblical law? So this was actually going to be a dispute, and according to this opinion, when Ezra returns from the Babylonian exile, he sanctifies Eretz Yisrael on a biblical level, but in the time of the Second Temple, mitzvot that are dependent on the land, like tithing, as well as the laws related to Sheviis, would also be biblical in nature. And according to this view, that during the Second Temple era, when tithing is only going to be on a rabbinic level, this presents no difficulty, because if you were to say at that time that Sheviis law is also going to be at the rabbinic level, then according to the biblical level, the lender could collect his debts after Sheviis. And the rabbis could certainly create an institution to circumvent their own requirement to cancel debt. And the Bavli, by the way, is going to be talking about in Gittin 36a, addressing what authority the rabbis have to enact that Sheviis could cancel debts when it's not going to be mandated in the Torah in the first place. So the Gemara is going to interrupt to address the implication that there's no difficulty according to the opinion that the tithing requirement is not biblical during the Second Temple era. Rabbi Yossi says, but even according to the opinion that the tithing requirement was not biblical during the Second Temple era, nevertheless, from the time that Israel was exiled to Bavel after the destruction of the First Temple, they were exempted only from mitzvot that are linked to the land, and cancellation of debts by Sheviis is not linked to the land. In other words, debt being wiped out in Sheviis can be anywhere. You can be in New York City. And that's going to apply according to biblical law, both in Eretz Yisrael, says this Gemara, and outside of Eretz Yisrael. So that you have two kinds of mitzvahs in the Torah. You have mitzvahs that are linked to the land, and you have mitzvahs that are just in general. For instance, the law of doing Shabbat. You have to do Shabbat. That's going to be anywhere in the world. It's not dependent on the land, but the laws of Sheviis are dependent on the land. The laws about the debt, however, is something as a peculiarity that is not dependent on the land. That's going to be anywhere, just like you have to celebrate Shabbat everywhere, just how you have to be modest if you're a woman. If you're a woman, you have to go to the mikveh. If you're a man, you have to find a wife and get married. You're not allowed to stay single. Every second that you're staying single is a sin. In fact, there's an amazing letter that there was a rabbi who was very picky for his daughter for shidduchim, and the daughter became much older, in her late 30s. And the father, who was even a rabbi, was turning down shidduchim based on kavod or money or family status. Also, sometimes maybe they would pass on a guy who's Sephardi, which is racist and terrible. And the Stipler heard about this, and he wrote a letter, a very strong letter. You can find this letter, it still exists today, that says that you're required to find, the Gemara says that a man is required, a father is required to find a husband for his wife, his daughter. And every second, the Stipler writes that this guy is not doing it, that he's sinning, and it's a big avera. And you might think, well, if today I spent some time trying to find a shidduch for my daughter, that I satisfied it. Not so, says a Stipler. If you are now free and you have time to do anything else, and you didn't actually go find a husband for your daughter, you're sinning. And so you see how serious it is for Jews to pick a wife and to get married, or to pick a husband and get married, not be so picky. And a lot of the shidduch crisis is because the people are very picky, and it's really rotten ideology and rotten midot. I see it all the time where people are passing because of this or that or this or that, and it's really nonsense. And it really makes me shake my head. I see so many Haredi guys that pass on very amazing Haredi girls, and because they're looking for a girl who's a little taller or a little bit skinnier or a little bit lighter skin or a little bit blonder hair or something, and it's really really a sin. And every second that you're going and living a life like that, you're really sinning. And you have two different kinds of mitzvahs in the Torah. You have out of the land and in the land, and everywhere you're supposed to just get married. And sometimes men will be so picky that they get to be too old, and all of a sudden now it's not realistic for the women that they have available to marry. And the halacha is you're not allowed to stay single. You have to pick a woman and get married, even if she's even too old to have kids. At some point, if you become too old to attract a woman who could still have kids, you gotta still get married. That's the Torah and that's the law, and you have to follow the Torah law. So the question over here about the Prozbul is going to be a question about why is it then that Rabbi Huna is going to limit this question to the opinion that tithing is going to be biblical even after the destruction of the first temple. So even if tithing is not required according to biblical law, since the cancellation of debts by Sheviis is not dependent on the land, then it is biblical in all places and all times. So how could Hillel institute a Prozbul and make it look like it's overriding a biblical requirement? So this is going to be challenged, and then we're going to get into Rabbi Huna's question and answer it. But first, Rabbi Yosei retracted and said that Rabbi Huna was justified in limiting his question to the opinion that even during the Second Temple era, the tithing obligation was biblical. And the verse states that this is the matter of relinquishment. Relinquish. This, by the way, is in Beurim 15:2. And it says over there that every creditor shall relinquish that which he has a claim on his fellow. So, according to the Marafulda, Rabbi Yossi's expounding that the double mention of the term relinquishment is an allusion to the two requirements that occur during Sheviis. One is the prohibition to work the land, and the second is going to be the cancellation of the debts. So the Gemara is going to continue and it's going to teach that when relinquishment of one's rights to the land, this is going to be a prohibition to work the land. That's going to apply according to biblical law. And again, the Torah has this double relinquishment in there in Devarim 15:2. And the Gemara says that relinquishments of debt applies both in Eretz Yisrael and out of Eretz Yisrael according to biblical law. But when relinquishment of the land applies only according to rabbinic law, then the relinquishment of debts applies both in Eretz Yisrael and outside Eretz Yisrael according to rabbinic law. So with the relinquishment of debts not being linked to the land, for this reason, Rabbi Huna, who asked how Hillel could institute the Prozbul, limits his question only according to the one who holds that tithing and relinquishment of the land and cancellation of the debts nowadays applies according to biblical law. So one of the issues that they're bringing up here is that, well, wait a second, if this is going to be tied together in the Torah, relinquishment and relinquishment, and if today the majority of the people are not here so that it's going to be a d'Rabbanan requirement, and also when Ezra came in, the majority of the Jews were outside of the land, so that is also going to be d'Rabbanan. So that if this is d'Rabbanan, then maybe the relinquishment of the debts is also going to be d'Rabbanan. So the Gemara is going to answer Rabbi Huna's question. And there in Bavel, they say as follows. So we're going to get according to the Babylonian rabbis. It says there in Bavel, they say as follows, even according to the one who says that tithing today is going to be biblical, he agrees that relinquishment of the debts is only rabbinic. For a Brisa taught, and in this matter of the relinquishment, where it says relinquish, Rebbe says these two relinquishments are referring to Shemitah and the relinquishment of loans and the Yovel relinquishment of land. So big chiddush here by Rebbe. According to Rebbe, the where it says in Devarim 15:2, where it says relinquishment twice, that's alluding to the relinquishment of debts on Sheviis and the relinquishment of land, where it's going to go back to the ancestral owners on the Yovel. And in his opinion, the Torah is not referring to the prohibition of working the land as one of the relinquishments. Why? Because it can be assumed that the Torah is likening similar laws. And also, we already have a verse in the Torah that already says that you're not allowed to work the land. So over here, Rebbe is basically saying that the relinquishment here and the relinquishment here, this double one, is talking about two things that are related. One is going to be the relinquishment of loans, and the other is the relinquishment of previous ownership arrangements that took away the property from the ancestral owners for a short period of time, like in a lease or a sale, and then it reverts back to the original owners, the ancestral owners. And so in both cases, this are going to be the two kinds of relinquishments. So the Gemara is going to basically be saying that it's going to apply to the relinquishment of loans and the Yovels. So over here, he's going to continue and he's going to say when the Yovel relinquishment of the land applies, the Shemitah relinquishment of the loans applies according to biblical law. So in other words, if one of these is going to be not applicable, then the other one is going to be there as a biblical, as a D'Rabbanan law. So the Gemara continues, says, when Yovels are suspended, Shemitah and the relinquishment of loans applies only according to rabbinic law. And so since Yovel is not in effect and was not in effect during the Second Temple period, there's no biblical requirement to cancel loans after Sheviis at that time. And so therefore, Hillel is justified to institute the Prozbul. Why? Because Rebbe's saying that anyway, it's D'Rabbanan. The repayment of the loans in today's day is going to be D'Rabbanan. It's not a biblical level requirement. Why? Because the other components of Sheviis are not D'Oraita at this time. And when it becomes D'Oraita, then this will be D'Oraita. But at this time, this is going to be a D'Rabbanan thing. And because it's D'Rabbanan, and because the repayments of the loans are D'Rabbanan, so anyway, you can be makel about it. You can be lenient on it because it's not a biblical requirement. There are biblical requirements that are still in effect, like how a man has to go get married to a woman and how you're supposed to go try to have children. And you're not allowed to be a man who just sits and stays single. Every second that you're just sitting in your singleness, you are sinning. Go pick a beautiful Jewish wife. Every Jewish woman is beautiful. And find one who is modest and has good midot and is God-fearing and knows some halachot and get married to her. So we want to get into this other thing about what is making the loan to be D'Rabbanan, the loan repayment to be D'Rabbanan right now. So the Gemara is going to talk about the Yovel part, when the Yovel ended in a D'Oraita level, and why, because these two things are linked in the Torah in Devarim 15:2, where it says relinquishment. So what happened where Yovel becomes is going to become a D'Rabbanan thing and not going to be in effect, and that's going to cause the loan repayment to be D'Rabbanan at this time. This, by the way, all becomes biblical again, and when the majority of Jews come here, this is going to switch over, and become Doraita. Also, it has to do with the tribes returning, and the Mashiach is going to be designating all of that. So, when did the Yovels become suspended? And the Gemara answers by citing a Brisa. The verse referring to Yovel states, "You shall proclaim freedom in the land for all its inhabitants," teaching that Yovel applies at a time when its inhabitants are on the land, but not at a time when they were exiled from the land. So the term inhabitants indicates that Yovel does not apply when all or most of the population is exiled from Eretz Yisrael. And that's going to be, based on a commentary from the Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim is saying that inhabitants here is trying to show that most of the population has to be in Eretz Yisrael. The majority of Jews has to be there in order for the Yovel to work. The Gemara says, furthermore, even if they were all on the land but were intermingled, so that you had, for instance, says this Gemara, the tribe of Judah dwelling in the territory of Benjamin, and the tribe of Benjamin dwelling in the territory of Judah, it could be thought that the Yovels should be in effect. And the Torah therefore states its inhabitants. And the word its, this is going to be teaching that the inhabitants have to be in the designated places. So the term its inhabitants is going to imply the specific inhabitants for each particular area. And these territories were determined through lottery during the days of Yeshua and his court. And during the first 14 years of the Jewish people's residence in Eretz Yisrael, the Yovel is not in effect yet because the land was not fully turned over to each family. And by the way, this is going to agree with the Bavli, which states that the tithing cycle did not begin until after the first 14 years. Why? When the property, because again, it's based on your land. When it's your land, when was that? Well, that was when the people had full occupation of it. And so that's when all of this stuff turns on. That's when the tithing turns on. That's when the Yovel turns on. So the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say, by stating for all its inhabitants, the Torah is teaching that Yovel is only in effect when none of the tribes are missing. So then you can conclude and say, once the tribes of Reuben and Gad and half of the tribe of Manasseh were exiled, the Yovels were abolished. So these are going to be the tribes that are living on the other side of the Jordan River, on the Jordan side of the Jordan River, not on the Israel side of the Jordan River today. And once they were exiled during the First Temple era, the Yovel ceased to be in effect. So the Rosh Cirilio is going to be saying about this that the Brisa is trying to indicate that even those tribes that were located on the east bank of the Jordan River are essential for the observance of the Yovel. Why? Because they're also deemed as inhabitants of the land. And they also have a right to a portion of Eretz Yisrael. So at that time, that's going to be when the Yovels were abolished, and they did not come back with Ezra. So the Gemara now is going to talk about the words of the Mishnah that is going to read, and it's going to say, this is the text of the Prozbul, and the Gemara states a law about the Prozbul. Rabbi Hizkiah says in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, even if the judges are situated in Rome, the Prozbul is valid. In other words, this is trying to say, says Rabbi Kanievsky, that even if the lender and the borrower are not in the same city as the court, the lender may still affect a Prozbul by making a declaration in front of the witnesses that he's submitting the loan over to the court. And that is effective even if the court never hears about the execution of the Prozbul, according to Rabbi Kanievsky. So the implication by the Pnei Moshe is that the Gemara is teaching that the lender may execute a Prozbul in writing and send the document to the court. And this is also going to be about executing a Prozbul even through an out-of-town court. So another way to look at this, says Rosh Cirilio, is that the Gemara is teaching that the lender may execute a Prozbul even though his loan documents are in Rome. And the idea is that the institution of the Prozbul is going to provide that the lender does not need to physically hand over the notes, and he just needs to assign the loan over to the Bet Din. The Gemara now is going to talk about a ruling that will be related in the Mishnah. Rabbi Ba says in the name of the rabbis there in Bavel, if 3 judges adjudicated a case and one of the judges died, the verdict is recorded with the 2 surviving judges signing it on top. And they state in the document as follows. It says, even though we signed with 2 judges, we adjudicated with 3. So without this clause, people would think that the case was adjudicated by just 2 judges. Now, the question is, what about a ruling that's issued by a court having just 2 judges? Well, that's going to be a dispute. There's an opinion that it's not a valid ruling. So if you have a ruling that's issued and then the 3rd judge just happens to die, they write on the text that this was adjudicated by 3 judges, but there are 2 signers. So this is going to be where it's still a valid adjudication because it was adjudicated by 3. So the Gemara now is going to support the ruling. Rabbi Chagai says, our Mishnah indicates this law, for the judges say, and either the judges sign below or the witnesses sign, and just as only 2 witnesses may sign the Prozbul, so two judges may sign it as well. So even if just one of the 3 Prozbul judges die, the 2 remaining judges sign the document. And with regards to a Prozbul, it's not necessary to write that it was originally with 3 judges. Why? Because the names of the judges that are there are going to be recorded in the body of the document. And therefore, since it's going to be written down in the body of the document that it's being done in front of 3 judges, if you had a case where just 2 of the judges sign, nonetheless, the body of the document is going to be referring to 3 of the judges that are going to be there. So now the Gemara is going to question this, and they're going to say, but can we derive monetary law from the laws of a Prozbul? In other words, can we establish that in order to avoid a Sheviis prohibition? In other words, how can we derive the rules governing a purely monetary issue from a Prozbul whose purpose is to avoid the relinquishment of loans through the Sheviis year? And since the Prozbul document serves merely to record the lender's oral declaration, perhaps the sages here are going to be treating it leniently, only allowing 2 judges to sign. But in a document recording a monetary judgment, it's going to require the signatories of all 3 judges. So how then could you have any arrangement where there's just 2 people signing, 2 judges signing? So the Gemara is going to deflect this. And a Brisa was found, which we can affirm that monetary laws can be derived from the laws of the Prozbul. And the Gemara says that if the borrower does not have land, but those obligated to him has land, we may write a Prozbul for his loans. And what is the case? Reuben is liable to Shimon, and Levi is liable to Reuben. And if Reuben has no land, but Levi, who owes Reuben money, has land, we write him a Prozbul for Shimon based on Levi's possessions. So the question is, wouldn't it be where this law is based on a similar ruling with regards to monetary law, where the laws of Prozbul for monetary law, we can see that this is going to be, the laws of Prozbul are going to be consistent with monetary law. How is this? Well, we're going to see in the next mission of the chapter, in Halacha 3, that you can't execute a Prozbul unless the borrower has land. And the Brisa here is teaching that even if the borrower, Reuben, does not have land, but Levi, who owes Reuben money, has land, he can write a Prozbul for Shimon, the lender. So why? Because the person doesn't own the land, but he has a lien on the land. And so the idea is that he's signing over his lien on the land to the lender, and that's going to be enough that even though he doesn't own the land, he owns a lien on the land, and that's going to be enough. And so really what this is trying to prove is that this is not something, the Prozbul is not something that's outside of monetary law. In Judaism, it's totally within monetary law. And I think that's what this is trying to say. In other words, that, if you have a case where A lends B money and B lends money to C, and A has the right to demand payment directly from C, then, even though C never borrowed money from A still has the status of being a creditor, and he can litigate it accordingly. So the idea is that A can conceivably collect C's land as payment as the debt. And in this case, Shimon can draw up a Prozbul for Reuben's debt to him because we view Levi's land as if it were in Reuben's possession. Why? Because he has a lien on it. Anyway, it's very important to dig into the depths of halacha so that you can follow the halacha. It's not enough just to be God-fearing. You have to study the halachot and its details, because otherwise you'll just be a religious Amma Aretz. It's very important to get into the guts of the halachot so you can do Judaism in the right way. Have a great day.